and then we're going to have some discussion. And I think this is really great. It's a place for activists, and we've got a lot of people from around the country here also who've come to help out with this conference. So we're not all from New York. We got folks from Detroit. We got folks from Philadelphia, North Carolina, Baltimore. You know, so it's New Jersey, right? So we're all here, and it's exciting. So I'm just going to give some introductory remarks, and we'll go from there. Sound good?
Yes.
All right, great. Cool. So those of you who aren't from here, and even those of you who are from here, may not be familiar with the whole history of where we're standing. We're standing on the island of Manhattan. And the island of Manhattan, if you want to know about the evil and the horrors of this system, you need to just study the history of this island, and you'll come to understand it. At one point, before there were any Europeans on the island of Manhattan, there was a tribe of indigenous people called the Wappingers, and they lived here. And the first settlers were the Dutch, people from Holland, who came to settle here on the island of Manhattan. And they killed the Wappingers. They slaughtered them. They killed them all. And they did it rather easily. They slaughtered them, and they took control of the island. And so to celebrate taking control of the island, they had a kind of a picnic near where Wall Street is today, in that lower Manhattan area. And to celebrate the fact that they had slaughtered all the indigenous people and they had taken the island for themselves, at this picnic they had a kickball game. And they used the heads of the Wappingers to play the game, right? That's the evils of this system. And we also, you know, one of the reasons people all over the world know about New York City is because Wall Street is considered the center of the world economy. But where did Wall Street come from? Wall Street originated as people who sold insurance for slave ships, right? We talk about the African Holocaust. Millions of African people kidnapped from Africa, taken to the United States as slaves, millions not even making it. And that was the source. And so don't let anyone ever tell you, you know, we hear all this propaganda, the capitalists, they earned it. You know, we hear the wealthy people, they all earned it. No, the wealth that built capitalism, the wealth that is in the hands of the bankers and all that, originated with mass theft and slaughter of people around the world. That's the basis of the capitalist property that exists today. So many injustices have gone on, so many wars, so much repression, if you study the history of Manhattan and New York City. But in addition to that, there's also been resistance. You know, people have always been fighting back against these injustices that have gone on. People don't take it. People do resist, and they do fight back. You know, in the United States, there were heroic slave rebellions led by Nat Turner, Harriet Tubman, and others. They were as exciting. And one of the most well-read anti-slavery newspapers in the country was actually published here in New York City. And it was called the New York Tribune. And the European correspondent for the New York Tribune was a man named Karl Marx, who I think some of us are familiar with. You know, we have this impression, if you go to the college and the universities now, they give you the idea that Karl Marx was somebody who just sat in an office writing essays and articles. But the reality is that Karl Marx was an organizer and a fighter. And Marx came to understand what a lot of people who have been organizing and fighting against injustice have come to understand, that if you want to change the world, you have to analyze it, and you have to learn how it works. And if you want to learn how the world works, and you want to if you want to do that, you really have to learn how to change it. That learning and changing are connected. And that's the understanding that Karl Marx brought with the science of dialectical materialism. And it was Marxism that gave us this understanding that the way the world is today, that we have the system of capitalism. Where in capitalism, you have a small group of people who own for a living, right? We have the 1% or the 0.0001%. A group of people who own things like banks, things like factories, things like big box stores. One example of capitalists is the Kroc family. They're the people who own McDonald's. They've never been into most of the McDonald's that they own. They've never mopped the floors. They didn't design the golden arches. They didn't invent the hamburger. They just own. But every day, including today, including every other day, there are millions of people who go to McDonald's and sweat and work, but the wealth that they produce through their labor, the overwhelming majority of the wealth that's produced from the work that the people working at the McDonald's do, doesn't go to them. It goes to the Kroc family, who have billions and billions of dollars. That's one example. But in addition to this small, tiny 0.001% of humanity, if it's even that, there's the overwhelming majority. There's everyone in this room, everyone we see on the street, we're workers. What is a worker? A worker is anyone who sells their labor to survive. You might have a job, you might be at McDonald's, you might be in a factory, you might have a specific skill, You might be a student in a university, because why are people going to the university? They're going there with the intention of getting a degree so they can get a better job and sell their labor for a better price. You know, you know, a growing number of workers in this country right now are in prison. Prison labor is a growing thing. People in prison are doing labor. The majority of humanity, the overwhelming majority, are workers with nothing to sell but our labor. And we sell our labor to the capitalists. And the capitalists own the economic heights of the economy, you know, these banks, factories, and they own it. And through the labor that we do, they make profits. And because the economy is organized around making profits for capitalists, things get interesting. For example, right now here in New York City, the Food Bank of New York issued a report. And the report said that right now in New York, there are more people in New York City right now who are hungry now, at this moment, than there were during Hurricane Sandy. Why is that? But if you look, every night, there's thousands of pounds of food are thrown away. Because food doesn't get produced so people can eat it. Food gets produced so people can sell it, so they can make a profit off of it. There are 20 empty housing units for every homeless person in this city. But again, they don't build buildings and apartment buildings so people can live in them. They build buildings and apartment buildings so capitalists and bankers and landlords can make profits off of them. The economy is organized around profits. And capitalism in the United States has gotten to the point that it's not just regular capitalism. We have what's called imperialism, or capitalism in its monopoly stage, where the capitalists of the United States, they don't just rule over the workers of the United States, they rule over the entire world. And because they rule over the entire world, they don't just make profits. They make super profits. They make billions and billions of dollars. And around the world, you have workers who are not just exploited like the workers at McDonald's or somewhere else. They're super exploited. You go to Bangladesh, you have people working in garment factories. You go to other parts of the world, people are super exploited. And in addition, black workers in the United States, who are the last hired and the first fired, who face police brutality and attacks, they're super exploited as a nation here in the United States. Immigrant workers, who face constant threats and terror and the ICE raids, they're also super exploited. In the age of imperialism, we have super exploitation by the billionaire monopoly capitalists in the Western countries. And whenever some government around the world wants to fight for independence, wants to break out of that system, that's when the tanks and the bombs and the cruise missiles start flying to serve imperialism. In Libya, Muammar Gaddafi was leading Libya, and he had nationalized the oil. He took the oil from the BP and Shell and the Western corporations, and he was using it to benefit the Libyan economy, not the Wall Street economy. And so what happened? The U.S. and NATO, they bombed Libya into bits. And of course, what did they say? They said, oh, we're doing this because we just care so much about the Libyan people. Oh, we just want to protect them from evil Gaddafi. But how often have we heard this? You go back to when Wall Street and the slave ships, did the slave owners say, oh, we're going to Africa. We're just going to Africa because we just want to take the people and exploit their labor and use them. No, of course not. They said, oh, we're going to Africa. We want to civilize these people. We care so much. That's why we're enslaving. Oppressors always have lies. And the fact that they own the media, they're able to push those lies on us. In 2009, the people of Honduras elected a democratically elected president, Manuel Zelaya. Overwhelming majority. And Manuel Zelaya, again, was sticking up for the people of Honduras, not obeying Wall Street. So what did they do? They had a CIA coup and they overthrew him. As much as they tell us about democracy, they love democracy. When democracy goes against what they want, all of a sudden democracy flies out the window. You look at what's happening right now in Ukraine. The U.S. just overthrew the government of Ukraine. Unleashed fascists, Nazis, in the streets, terrorizing people, murdering people. You look at what's happening in Venezuela right now. In Venezuela, because the government of Venezuela has stood up for the people and provided things like health care and education and used the oil profits from Venezuela for the people of Venezuela and not for the oil companies, the U.S. is destabilizing and sending in these attacks. This is the reality of what we live under at this point. This is the reality of capitalism imperialism. And like I said, even within the U.S., there are oppressed nations. And just like the U.S. government killed Gaddafi because he stood up for his people, if you look on the wall there's Fred Hampton. The U.S. government murdered Fred Hampton in his bed with 200 bullets. He was a leader of the Black Panther Party. And they murdered him because he was standing up against racism and the racist oppression of the black nation as a leader of the Black Panther Party. Numerous leaders of the black nation in the United States have also been murdered and killed. This is the reality of the system we live under. Imperialism, super profits, exploitation. the rule of the world by a small group of billionaire bosses and bankers. So the question is, what should be done about that? Well, the solution that so many people fighting against injustice have come up with. And if you look at any progressive revolutionary movement in the history of this country, you'll know that among the leaders of that movement were communists, whether it's the trade union struggle, the civil rights movement, the women's liberation struggle. Marxism-Leninism has always been a leading ideology among people fighting back against injustice. And the solution that communists and Marxists have is that the banks and the factories and the industries, all these things that exist, all these means of production, all these commanding heights, that they should be owned by the people, that we, the working class, should seize control of the economy. And when we do that, that's called socialism, when the workers control the economy. And because we would control the economy, it would no longer operate just to make profits for a capitalist. It would be a planned economy. We could say, there are all these empty housing units and there are all these homeless people. Let's put them in the houses. We could say people don't have to be hungry. Right? That's what socialism is, and we've seen socialism is already starting to come into being. Cuba today is a socialist society, and no one is unemployed in Cuba. Everyone has a job, everyone has the right to health care and education, and on average the Cubans, even according to the CIA World Factbook, live longer than any other people in Latin America. There are other countries. The Soviet Union was an example of socialism. And under the Soviet Union, they were the first people to enter outer space. They achieved huge achievements. They saved humanity from the Nazis and from fascism. Socialism has been a success, but everywhere we've seen socialism, it's always been surrounded and attacked. It's never been pure because it's always been threatened by imperialism. For socialism to really blossom, we need the system of capitalist imperialism to be brought down. So I want everyone to step back for a moment and actually start to imagine what a socialist New York City would be like. Think about it. I think we should all be thinking about this kind of stuff. I think one of the first things that would happen in a socialist New York City is that a new working class government would put the NYPD on trial. That criminal racist gang that goes around murdering people all over this city would be put on trial and have to stand on trial for their crimes against the working people. People like Bill Bratton and all of that would have to face justice. And like I said, we would make sure that people had housing. And look at all the people in this city that are unemployed. There's over 1 million people in this city that are unemployed, that don't have a job. In a socialist New York City, we would bring all of those people in, because everyone has something to contribute to society. So many people are full of energy and so much to contribute, especially the youth. But because the capitalists can't make profits from hiring them, they're locked out of the economy. So much suffering would go on. And, you know, imagine a socialist society having schools that aren't filled with cops and metal detectors, where students are being degraded and taught to be obedient slaves, but rather students being trained to be leaders of society. Schools that actually encourage the youth to stand up. You know, when you ride the subways in the morning, you know, you see people, you know, around, you know, people on their way to work. People don't look happy when they're on their way to work. People don't want to go to work in this society, right? Because when you go to work, you're not there, that's not your time. That's your employer's time. You're there to make money for some boss. But imagine if going to work, you had a smile on your face. Because you were on your way to work knowing that you were going to make a contribution and that the work you do would benefit the people in your community, your neighborhood, and all over the world. That you were working to advance yourself, not someone else. That would be a totally different feeling. And that's what socialism in New York City would be like. Right now, this system of capitalism is in crisis. You know, we talk about the prison industrial complex. At this point, the capitalists can't make profits from hiring people. They're not making profits from hiring people. With high tech, they've eliminated so many jobs. There are people who aren't being hired. So instead of making profits from hiring people, they're making profits from locking people in prison. 2.5 million people in prison. So the capitalists can make profits off of it, right? Prisons for profit. Is that disgusting?
Yes.
The earth is heating up right now. The earth is heating up. And we're having global warming. We see these unnatural, it's been an unnatural winter, you know, here in New York. We've seen these unnatural weather events taking place. And we see all of this going on, and people naturally, we want to do something about this. This is causing a catastrophe, a climate catastrophe. But doing that would take away from the capitalist profits. So the people who own the economy and control the governments of the world, they don't want to solve the problem. There's even now a new threat of war. You know, the U.S. is intervening in Syria. It's intervening in Ukraine. And China and Russia and many countries around the world are pulling together to oppose the U.S. and oppose imperialism. And because of that, with that happening, there was a real danger there could be a new war. Imagine that. All these unemployed youth, all these people with no future job under this system being drafted, being handed a gun and sent to go fight people in China or Russia. Well, what we would say as revolutionary organizers in FIST is when that happens, they should turn the guns around and fight the bosses and the billionaires here in the United States. But in addition to the collapse that this system is under, we're starting to see the rumblings of revolution. It's happening. People, like I said towards the beginning of this talk, whenever there is oppression, there is resistance. We saw Occupy Wall Street. We saw all of a sudden, out of nowhere it seemed, there were thousands of people in the streets fighting the police, occupying. We saw what happened after the racist vigilante killer, George Zimmerman, was acquitted. We saw the streets were full of thousands of people. In North Carolina, a couple weeks ago, they had a huge civil rights demonstration. In a reactionary southern state, they had 80,000 people in the streets marching against racism and injustice. But I want to talk about something that happened in this city that's probably more important than all of those things I just mentioned. At Kings Plaza Mall, a couple days after the Christmas holiday, they'd made a rule that that young people under the age of 18 couldn't be there without an adult. Now we know what that is. That's an attack on the oppressed youth who hang out in that mall. It's their place to hang out. And that was an attack on them, basically saying they couldn't be there. It's part of gentrification, turning the city into a place for rich people, not the people who live here. And it was an attack. And so these youth, on their own, without any agitators, no communists showed up there and agitated them, they made a Facebook event and they called for a flash mob at Kings Plaza Mall. And what happened? There were 400 youth in that mall. And they tore the place up. And the police were called and they fought the police. Right? People have a will to fight against hostile conditions. The fighting is coming. Like I said, there were no communists there. There were no agitators. People will fight against hostile conditions. But if there's anything that we've learned from the history of the revolutions that have happened, whether it's the Cuban Revolution, the Russian Revolution, Chinese Revolution, Korean Revolution, is that uprisings and revolts can't just be a place for young people to go blow off steam. That if we want to have a revolution and we actually want to overturn the oppressive conditions, it has to have a purpose and it has to have a direction. And I'll tell you that I know very soon in this city, again, people are going to be in the streets. We don't know what the issue will be. It might be fast food. You know, there's this huge campaign going on demanding $15 an hour. And there's a march for $15 an hour coming up on March 15. The March for 15 might be fast food workers. It might be a rebellion against racism and police brutality. But whatever it is, people are going to be in the streets again. And when that happens, we need an organization of dedicated revolutionaries who can go into that struggle and build solidarity and point it in an anti-capitalist and revolutionary direction. That's what we need more than ever right now. People will rebel, they will fight back, but a revolutionary organization is needed to point us toward the solution that we need, which is the creation of a socialist society and the dismantling of imperialism. So I thank you all for coming today. I'm really excited. I think we're going to have some good discussions about how to build an organization that can actually organize and fight against injustice and turn this country and this whole world around. Thank you.
Thank you, Caleb. The next person that is going to be speaking is Ramiro regarding alienation, how capitalism separates humans from humanity.